Hey guys, I'm Kalynn Harlow. Quick question. How many of y'all have actually been in a swine barn? Alright, cool, we got pretty good representation. How many of y'all have not? Just for okay. How many of y'all seen a farrowing crate? A farrowing crate. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be spending today talking about, our farrowing crate. The good, the bad, and the ugly. They're pretty controversial topics, so hopefully I'm going to cover both sides for you, get a pretty well-rounded representation of how people perceive them. So our objectives today,
Use the computer.
Yep. It worked on my laptop this morning.
It's right there.
Yeah, it's right there.
Yeah, so
Try it again.
it's fine.
Yeah, you can just make that big if you
You
want.
can see.
Alright, y'all see that pretty well?
You can hide the sidebar.
Yeah. Too big. Alright, y'all see that pretty well? Okay, so our objectives today are going to be to distinguish a farrowing crate from other crate used in the industry, and then hopefully to explain the advantages and disadvantages for the piglet, the sow, and finally the caretaker, because there are pretty distinct differences between all three of them, so hopefully we'll cover all three of them. Let's go back to the sidebar, not to that.
You can just go on the side.
Okay. Thank you guys for helping me out.
You might actually be able to use the arrows as well.
Arrows.
Yeah.
Keyboard arrows.
Yeah, it's not working. Okay, I got this. So we have some lingo that I want to make sure that we're all on the same page for. I'm assuming most of y'all know what a sow is. So it's a female pig that has to have at least one birth at this time. Farrowing is the act of a pig giving birth. It's essentially the same as calving or lambing between species. Gestation is the length of time between conception and birth. And finally, biosecurity, which is going to be the one I'm going to hit kind of hard today, are protocols implemented in order to reduce the spread of disease. Alright, the controversy. Farrowing crates, they're estimated to be used in approximately 85% of the farms in the United States. They're essentially a crate to be used when a sow is about ready to farrow, so when she's about ready to give birth, you move the sow in there about 3 or 4 days before she gives birth, and this is to protect both the mother as well as the piglet and also the caretaker, or at least that's the way the industry justifies it. There are other different crates used in the industry. There are gestation crates, this is where the main controversy exists, which I'm not going to go into as much today, but it's essentially leaving the sow in there from the point of conception to the time when she gives birth, which is about a 3-month period. A lot of people don't like this because the sow is not able to turn around. The crate usually will be from about here to about here, so about 4 or 5 foot long, and it usually be about this wide. So as you can see, the sow is limited in her movement, which I'll discuss more a little bit later, but a lot of people have a lot of issue with that. Breeding crates are essentially just used to restrict the animal's movement so you're able to inseminate her properly. Farrowing crates, what's the topic today? The sow is in there for about 28 days from the time the piglet gives birth to the point where the piglet is weaned. This is the picture from PETA, in case that isn't obvious. They're against all crates in general because it restricts the sow's movement. They think that's not natural. This is an example of a gestation crate. I'm going to have a lot of pictures of farrowing crates as we go on, but there will be rows of sows lined up, and I'll discuss the advantages later. So, advantages to the piglet. This is actually a picture taken from the Swine Center on campus here. In case y'all haven't been around to visit, I highly recommend it. It's a controlled environment, which it allows you to regulate both the temperature for the piglet as well as the sow, which I'll cover later. But it allows the piglet to have an ambient temperature of about 90 to 95 degrees, which is a lot warmer than what the sow requires. The farrowing crate allows the prevention of the spread of disease. Since they're all maintained, each litter is maintained separately from another. As long as there is no transmission, as long as you're not touching a lot of piglets between litters, or you're changing gloves, or taking proper steps, biosecurity protocols, you're not going to have as much spread. It also allows you to closely monitor the health of piglets by keeping an eye on them every day since they're indoors and you're able to walk through. Finally, it lowers pre-weaning mortality. The highest rate of death for piglets, or the highest rate cause of death in piglets, is for crushing, which is when the sow lays on the piglet to where it's literally crushed to death. By separating or giving the piglets a way to move away from the sow, that reduces that. And it's currently overall standard for the industry is around less than 10%. With crates, that's much less than, say, if they were in an outdoor pasture. So the disadvantages for piglets: if your biosecurity system does fail, it causes the enhanced spread of disease. When I worked in the industry over the summer out in Iowa, it was about 14 rows, 3 rows per room. Or sorry, 14 crates per row, 3 rows per room. So if you are moving between crates, say if you have to process a lot of litters to check on them, make sure they're getting enough feed. If you're not taking the proper steps between the litters, say changing your gloves, making sure your needles are clean, etc., it can actually enhance the spread of disease. Next we have, if your crates are in poor condition, it can cause lacerations to the piglets if they run into them or they're fighting or something. Pigs also have a tendency to destroy things, so if your crates aren't in good condition, or if your crates aren't sturdy enough, your piglets are going to be able to destroy them. Finally, you can have falling below the crates. Most systems have a pit floor underneath your crates, which collects manure as well as urine. So if they get stuck underneath there, it's kind of difficult to get them back out. Finally, if your climate control malfunctions, say if your electrical system drops and your generator isn't there to back it up, you can have a lot of problems with your piglets as well as your sows. So advantages for the sow. It's pretty similar to the piglet. You have a controlled environment, you have your biosecurity protocols causing less disease transmission, and finally you're able to monitor their health since you have one-on-one contact with them. And for the sows, as I mentioned earlier, the piglets have a temperature requirement of about 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, whereas the sows have one that's between 65 and 70 degrees. So the pictures are kind of small, but there are heat lamps for the piglets that allows them to crowd under that if they are too cold, whereas it causes a centralized area for the piglets to go to and keep away from the sows to where you can maintain that temperature difference. Next, you have the ability to monitor their food and water intake, which is really important for sows in order to make sure they can keep lactating to keep those piglets fed. They have to have enough food to where they can maintain their energy levels. And if there are any changes as far as that goes, you run into problems. And by having them in crates, you can monitor that more closely, and if a change does happen, it can indicate problems later on. Next, we have sow disadvantages. Once again, it's pretty similar to the piglet. You can have enhanced spread of disease if biosecurity protocols are not in place. And the dangers of the crates are lacerations. Once again, as the other way, as I mentioned with piglets, pigs are pretty destructive. They're really nosy, so they'll play with things and they can cause just general breakdown in general. And shoulder sores are a condition in which if the sow rubs her shoulder against the crate and there are any burrs or anything to scratch that, they can become infected. It's essentially the same as a cyst or a pimple or something like that, to where it can cause an infection buildup under the site of the skin. It's just kind of just like a boil, or what you can imagine a boil would be like, and it can cause it to, if you don't rupture it quickly enough, it can be a problem. And as I mentioned, it's limited movement where people are really uncomfortable with that. Caretaker advantages: it's safer while taking care of the animals because you can quick piglet access and the sow is restrained, so you don't have a lot of, or you don't have to worry about her trying to attack you. It allows record keeping, which it makes obvious sense. If you have to give her medication or make sure the piglets are injected with the right thing at the right time, you can keep up with that. Finally, there's decreased labor and time, usually. Instead of having to run around in the pasture to give her an injection, she's right there. She's already restrained instead of using, say, a snare or something to keep her in one position. When I say usually, which leads to our disadvantages, I'm going to do the second point first. If you have to, say, remove a dead sow, it can be a little bit difficult to maneuver between the crates, which can be time consuming. And finally, if your caretaker reaches in between these crates, these bars are made of usually pretty heavy duty metal, and if she, say, tries to bite you or something and you snap your hand away, you can cut yourself, you can get caught between it. It's pretty endless, but as long as you maintain good attention, you're pretty safe. So the current state of the industry, they're currently using the majority of swine operations, both commercial and small scale. And people mentioned the reasons for use as being they're easy to access, it's safety for all three parties mentioned, and finally it's pretty efficient. These are just some alternative styles. This is a pasture pork system where they'll just put them in a barn and kind of keep them in a pen. And these are alternative farrowing crates, which it allows the pig that's just ways to get away from the mother, but it allows her room to move, which makes people happier as far as restricting her movement. Finally, just as a recap, I hope you learned, took away from this presentation, the differences between farrowing crates and other crates in the industry, the advantages and disadvantages of all the stakeholders involved, and finally that as of right now, they're pretty high use today. The number is currently about 85%. Whether or not this changes in the coming years, I suppose we'll see at this point in time. But as of right now, they're likely to remain, at least as far as farrowing crates go. Are there any questions?
What was the event where you said they're stuck in the crate for 3 months at a time?
That's the gestation crate.
And like, when they're in the gestation crate like that, do they have problems with, like, is there any negative health problems of like them not moving a whole bunch, like as far as like weakness or muscle weakness or?
Scientific literature shows that there is no change in productivity of the animal as long as they have access to food and water. They're able to stand up, they're able to lay down. In most circumstances, they're able to even get out of the crates. I've seen it happen. But just having them restricted in that way, it's not really an issue, even though people see that as an issue since they cannot move.
Yeah, so the increase in, like, I guess the opposition would be free range, that would be the alternative. So do you think the increase of free range swine production, do you think it's increasing at the same rate as this kind of swine production?
This one's currently in place in most industries across the United States. As far as free range goes, people have become much more keen to promote free range, free access, organic, whichever word you like to use. So that's definitely on the rise, especially as far as small scale producers go. Whether or not we'll see that on larger scales, I kind of doubt it, just because this allows you to put a lot of pigs in one area and monitor all in the same place, whereas pastures are kind of, you have to have a lot more land, you have to have a lot more resources. But if people are into it and they'll buy it, it's going to be around. Anything else?